Hey, welcome to a brand new podcast episode. I am your voice, Dakshin Adyantaya. And in today's episode, we incline towards modern practices and challenges of becoming a content creator. With our featured guest today, we intend to reveal productive skills and experiences to hopefully help you go from a planning mode to an execution mode. But before we indulge into our dialogue today, here's some fun facts that you need to know. We all have our favorite platform to create content. And one such popular platform is YouTube. But did you know YouTube was originally an idea for a dating website? No kidding. The idea was for single people to make videos introducing themselves and saying what they were looking for. And after 5 days of not receiving a single video, the co-founders reconsidered. And thank God for that. Interesting, right? And now it's time to meet our guest today, but before that,
this is the Deliberate Talks Weekly Podcast, powered by the Pixelated Egg Digital Ventures. Tune in every week to learn something new about digital marketing and entrepreneurship. And now, over to the voice of your host, Dakshin Adyantaya. Enjoy the show.
And we are back. Let's get straight into introducing our guest today. Today we have someone who shot to fame with her rebellious counter with HUL and their practices with Kodaikanal 1. The video hit a whopping 4.2 million views and was talk of the town in 2015. Today, she is a rapper, an advertising professional, and an activist who uses digital content to express her thoughts. Currently, she's the creative head at The Rabbit Hole, a video solution agency who has her hands full with the release of Behinsplaining, a feminist comedy review show commissioned by Netflix. Here's Sophia Ashraf.
Thanks, Dakshin.
Thank you, Sophia, for firstly being a part of the Deliberate Talks podcast. There's a lot written about you, about your journey, struggles, and work. But let me first begin with asking you, when did you discover your love for rapping, advertising, and music? And most importantly, I came across this term which is frequently mentioned with your name. And that's the rebel heart. How did you get this term?
Wow. So yeah, each of these has its own story. Rap has its own story. Ad has its own story. And music has its own story. But it's interesting that all three have combined now to kind of become a profession for me.
Right.
Which is never conscious. The way rap started, I wish there was an inspirational story here. But it's just that I love music, but I can't sing. And I can't play an instrument, so I rap. It's just that. The thing is, from a very young age, I loved dancing, and I always had that rhythm inside me as a dancer. But I grew up in a very orthodox household where women getting on stage dancing was kind of frowned upon. So at a certain after I grew a little older, they asked me to give up dancing, which broke my heart. Oh. And I had all this rhythm and music inside me, and I needed to find an outlet for all of that. Meanwhile, I'd always been a writer. I loved poetry. When I was 10 years old, I had this little purple book with poems that I would write every day. And it was all be like cat sat on a mat and ate a rat, But I've always loved rhyme schemes and the kind of rhythm that prose kind of formed. And so rap was just a very easy, seamless it was a seamless marriage of these two things, which was rhythm and poetry. So the poet in me was happy and the dancer in me was happy because I found an expression that was kind of allowed but not really. So it was basically just me trying to find loopholes to get on stage and express myself.
That's great. And how did advertising come into the picture?
So advertising, when I was younger, I never really knew there was an industry called advertising. And I've just always been such a fan of 90s advertising. Come on, who can forget the Feast, the Big F and Nijam Pak, which was like that Michael Jackson black and white face mop thing. We all grew up with singing ad songs, and it just seemed really fun. I never thought there was someone sitting and writing them. But then when I did my master's, I've always loved art. So I was a designer. So I joined my master's in graphic design. And I thought art only had one profession, which is you have to become M.F. Hussain. I didn't know that the commercial artist was a profession. But when I took it up in college, they were like, hey, advertising is a profession, graphic design is a profession. I was like, what? I want to do this. And then advertising, so I started doing advertising. I joined a bunch of agencies. My first job, though, was that as a copywriter in a greeting card company.
Wow.
Like I would write all this, I love you, I love, you are loved by me. Here, give me my monthly salary. But after that, I discovered the term called copywriter. And then I found out that copywriter is a thing that advertising people do. And I fell in love and I joined advertising as a copywriter.
Great. So how did this whole aspect of rebel heart come into the picture?
So this is something I honestly never consciously worked toward. So the deal is like in the beginning when I used to rap, I was rapping. I told you how it happened. I loved rhythm and poetry and it found an expression. And I was an angry teenager. So back then my fight and expression found its way out through music. Because actually I'm not like a very angry person I'm not super assertive. I'm not that kind of person. But through my music, I found this great way to be angry. And it was like kind of okay somehow to be angry through music. So I found assertion through music and it was a very cathartic experience for me. So when I was to rap, I was also very, very religious back then. And this was just post 9/11. Everyone was treading around eggshells around Muslims, wondering, can I talk to them about this? Can I ask them this question? What is Islam? Does Islam stand for terrorism? And I was like, you know what? I think through my music, I can maybe express myself and tell the world all these things that I want to tell you, that Islam isn't about terrorism. Stop judging me based on my hijab. I'm a normal human being. Things like that, my identity as a hijabi and why I wear a hijab. I wanted to say it through passion and not through hate. So I found that through music, I could do that. And I think it was not a conscious thing that, I want to break stereotypes by doing this. But back then, rapping itself was a stereotype that I was breaking, which I didn't realize. And then a female rapping was another stereotype that was being broken, which I didn't realize because I didn't see myself as a woman rapping. I just saw myself as someone rapping, And then a woman in a hijab rapping in Tamil, there were all these stereotypes that were being broken. And then people just started seeing me as a rebel. And I think that term stuck, that like a rebel. But I would hope that people see me as a rebel with a cause instead of a rebel without a cause.
So just curious, do you still get stereotypically labeled? And if yes, more importantly, how do you deal with it now?
I think people do still put me into labels. And now I've reached a point where I don't fight those labels because I understand now that maybe this label helps them get a perspective that maybe not labeling me would get. I'll give you an example. When you label me a female rapper, now that honestly earlier used to put me off a lot. Because I'm like, why you call me a female rapper? Call me a rapper. Kam se matlab rakh, I'm a rapper. Why does my gender have to come before my work? But then I also understand that when there is a young girl in Kannur, Kerala, seeing a female rapper, that girl suddenly becomes aware that, hey, this is something that is not outside my skill set and not outside my gender and not outside my opportunity spectrum. If a girl from Kannur in a hijab who's a female can rap, so can I. So sometimes these labels help people relate to me better and in a way maybe helps give them that little bit of push that maybe they need. Another way that labels help is, what if there is someone who's not a Muslim, who sees me and hears my music or my conversations and gets a perspective on Islam that they might not have before. So sometimes these labels help. I feel I always attach or prefix or suffix these labels based on context. If I'm rapping in Bombay, I will never call myself a female rapper or a female director because I would say maybe I'm talking out of privilege, but I've been lucky enough to only work in industries in Bombay where it's meritocracy. Nobody gives a shit whether you're a woman or a man as long as your work is good here. At least in the industry I am in, advertising, filmmaking, it's only about how good your work is. So there I refuse to be called a female writer or a female director. But the moment I come into a Chennai, I go into a Kannur, I go to a Chandigarh, there I will be like, okay, you want to call me a female rapper, do it. Because maybe there are some kids in the audience, There are men in the audience who needs to see women doing this. There are women in the audience who need to see women doing this.
Right.
And in that case, I think having these labels put on you is fine.
So moving on to a conversation more related to your work practices, what do you think about being creatively disciplined and how important it is, and how do you go about implying this at work?
Oh my God, what a great question. I wish more people ask me this question. This is something I'm very passionate about. Also because I think you discover it the hard way in a creative field, because you assume creativity is erratic. It's inspiration led. Creativity is something that comes to you. You don't go to it. And when that creativity is your profession, which means creativity needs to come to you on demand. How do you find that is something I had to learn my own way. Primarily because I think for a lot of us, we're the first ones doing this. Content creator, what is that? Our parents can't tell us how to navigate that industry because they've not done it. Their 9 to 5 is completely different from my 9 to 5. And there's no one to give me advice, no one I can turn to except my own peers who are also figuring this out on their own. So you build these disciplines on your own and you realize the fallacy of assuming that creativity is not a discipline. The more you do it, you realize that discipline is what really hones your creativity. Like when I was younger, I believed I knew everything there was to know, and that creativity can't be taught, and that it's inspiration led. Talent is talent, which is still true for a fact. Talent and taste is what gets you started. Right. But if you want a profession out of this, and you want to be someone who, even if you're in a bad mood, should be able to write, even if you're going through a breakup, should be able to write, even if you're sleepy, should be able to write, even if it's 9 o'clock in the morning, should be able to write. You need to build that discipline, and the way you do that is by writing every day, by stop assuming that inspiration will come to you. Like the Greek believed that genius is an angel that visits you. It's just this angel that comes and puts a thought in your head. And honestly, a lot of times I felt that way. I felt like, oh my God, how the hell did I get that idea? I don't know. But the fact is, it's because I'm feeding that discipline into me every day. That angel visiting me is actually just become a subconscious pathway that I have built because of my daily discipline. Because I wake up every day and I write. Whether I want to or not, my job demands it, so I wake up and write. So it stops becoming writing stops becoming conscious, and it becomes the Greek genius angel visiting me. But that comes only through discipline. And I think discipline need not specifically be timing. Of course, timing does help, but just I think routine and consistency. And this has been the hardest for me, because doing something consistently takes some sort of focus. And if there's one thing about our generation that we are all at fault for, we are extremely distracted. We move from one thing to the other, and it's not because we can't focus, it's because we think there is a better choice out there or a better opportunity out there that we are letting go of by sticking to this opportunity. The number of times I've had like maybe an intern come to me saying, okay, I want to learn from you. And then I give them a copy test and I start giving them work. And then when they start struggling at that work, they will turn to me and say, hey, maybe this is not for me. I think I'm going to move to something else because I have this other option.
Right.
Because back in the day, if you were a writer, you only could be a journalist. Today, if you're a writer, you can be a journalist, you can work in television, you can work in content writing, you can work in web writing, you can work in website, you can work in television, you can work as a screenwriter. There's so many options that you think, okay, maybe for a moment, if I suck at something, I can move to something else. But here is the truth about creativity. It's easy to be pretty good at something for an amateur, that's how all of us start off, right? Like you write a poem and someone reads it and says, wow, Sophie, this is pretty good for someone who's not a professional writer. I think you should give writing a chance. And that's how you get into writing, because you realize, hey, I'm pretty good. And you assume you're always going to be pretty good. But pretty good for an amateur doesn't cut it for pretty good for a professional. And that journey from pretty good for an amateur to pretty good for a professional is not a linear journey. There will be a part where you will suck.
True.
Because the amateur is not a professional. So sticking to that profession at that time, at that moment, realizing that, okay, at least you have good taste to know that your work is not good, you will get better if you stick to it. That is where the discipline and consistency comes. And I think that was the hardest time for me, because I was like, oh, maybe I'm not cut out for this field. Maybe I should quit. None of my ads are getting made. I went through 4 years in advertising without a single ad campaign being released. And it's so easy to call it quits in a creative field and say, okay, maybe I'll try something else. But stick to it. You will get from pretty good for an amateur to pretty good for a professional. Just suck at something. Suck at something and you'll get there.
I can't agree more to that, because there is a part where a lot of people, try and start something new, but there is no consistency to it. And there's already a mindset which is made, which is unfortunate, because a lot of people say start a blog. They 3 months down the line or 5 months down the line don't get enough website hits or followers. And then they suddenly start questioning their own mindset, whether they're good at it or not. The problem is impatience. Where a lot of people are impatient, and hence they are not being able to put in as much as effort or have that consistency to put that effort and see the outcome eventually. Everyone's in a hurry to achieve something. And
I couldn't agree more. I was talking to this very young content creator who wanted to take up singing as a profession, and I heard her music and I was like, hey, listen, I think you need a little bit of voice training. I could suggest some voice classes for you. And she turns to me and she said some content creator's name. She's like, but this content creator doesn't have voice training and she's a hit. So because there are few people who get success without too much effort, everyone's like, I want that shortcut to success. Because someone has got it, I also want that. I think, like, you remember back in the day, if you wanted to be a musician, you'd have to record a demo tape of yours physically and then stand outside a studio and wait for an A.R. Rahman or Ilayaraja to walk out, and then you will run behind them and say, sir, listen to my tape. Today you just have to put out a video and hope it goes viral, So I think it's so easy to get recognition today that we forget that, hey, just because someone got it easy doesn't mean everyone will get it easy. Yes, everyone hopes they'll be that lucky, but it is a lot of luck, it is a lot of hard work, but like everyone in this industry has said, you find that the harder you work, the luckier you get.
True, absolutely. Very interesting. Just extending to that part, you spoke about the discipline, but say, how does the writing and the thinking exercise come into execution? Say, for example, when you get a project, you are someone who's driven very heavily with research. And research is an important aspect of everyone's work. I want to know, when you get a client brief, how does your brainstorming process begin?
So I'm a sucker for writing software, for project management tools, for mind hacks and CBD tools and all of that. So I'm going to share some of the things that work for me. One of the things that I've recently discovered is structured procrastination. This is something that has kind of helped me understand my way of working. Now, of course, you're a driven, motivated person. You want to do things, but come on, everyone procrastinates. There are days you wake up and saying, "Aaj kaam nahi karna hai." And how do you get that motivation to sit in front of a laptop and write, or sit in front of a computer and edit? So what I do is I break up all my tasks into multiple post-its. Like, I will break them up into really ridiculous simple tasks also. For example, if I'm editing something, then I will break it up into watch the footage as one of the tasks. If I'm writing something, I will break it up into read an article about this as one of the tasks. So now I have about 10-15 post-its which I put on my wall. Then I also break up all the other tasks during the day, which is like vacuum the floor, feed the cat. Someone has sent me an article, read that article. I break up all these tasks. Because I've realized that when I sit down to work, I have the intent to work. That is, I'm like, chalo, aaj kaam karna hai. But I don't have the motivation to work. Because I will very rarely open, there will be a blank document and I stare at it. That is not how I procrastinate or get a creative block. My creative block will be, I will sit and I'll be like, acha, pani dalna hai na paudho ko, then I'll go and water the plant. And in my head, I'm still doing work. I'm being productive, but I'm not being productive towards my task. But suppose all these 15-20 tasks, including water plants, is in front of me. Then I'm like, okay, pauda ka pani dal diya, and I peel that off. And I'm like, agla, okay, there's this chota task, just read this article. And I start reading the article. So once I've opened that Word document and typed that first word, then you can't pull me away. I am writing. So I think this process of structured procrastination is just a starting problem thing. So somehow getting me to open that document and write, I've found a hack to trick my mind into doing that. Another thing that I use some writing software. I use a software called Scrivener, which helps me organize my thought. Like you said, research is a huge part of what I do. So I spend at least a week or two in research. I read a lot of articles pertaining to this. As and when I see an article that is relevant to this, I save it to Pocket, and then I set aside an hour for just that research part. So I've collected these articles throughout the day. Then I open the Pocket app and I read all the articles. When I'm reading, I take down notes, and then these notes go into Scrivener, where it's like a corkboard kind of thing. I split up the research, I break it up into points, and then before I start writing, I have a scratch pad on that app to my right, which has all the points that I want to cover in the content piece that I'm writing. It will also have, I sometimes create a template. For example, the template in the case of a rap song will be jokes. Sometimes I want to put some joke in it. So there'll be like, okay, what are all the jokes I want to add? Points, like, okay, I want all this bit of research information to come in. And I put all that, and that is there to my right. Then once I start writing, I just need to keep referring back to that template that I've created. So these are just little hacks. Sometimes I don't need any of this. Sometimes an idea is just so good that you can't eat, sleep, or breathe until you get that idea out in paper. It's like it's there, like it's there, the tip of your tongue and the tip of your fingertips, and you feel like you can't do anything until I type or write it down. So those days you don't need all this, but there are some days when you need structured procrastination, you need writing software, you need outlining, corkboarding. I write post-its. Mere dimag mein I'm Sherlock Holmes. So my windows will have like post-its and thread and pins and this and images and all that. It's a way to get started.
But that idea part of it, when you know that you have cracked a great idea, I'm just very curious in terms of knowing what is that conversation that led to Sister from the South? How did that come into the existence as an idea?
It's really interesting. What had happened was I was in Chennai and a friend and I were jamming, and we were just talking about how there's so much marriage pressure and stuff. And I was telling her, oh yeah, I hate it when parents ask for good news. Like, I'm doing so much of good stuff at home. Why don't they care about that? All they care about is babies. Because this had actually happened from an actual conversation at home. I was at the dinner table, and my grandmother was like, hey, your uncle got a promotion, that's great and all. And I was like, I got a promotion too, why don't you talk about that? And my grandmother says, because a woman's promotion is when she gets married. All of us started laughing because we realized how regressive that statement was. And I don't think my grandmother even realized what she was saying. But I was like, oh my God, this is how family sees me. And this conversation led into me writing down the song. And then when I wrote the song, I was like, you know what, I want to make this into a video. So I approached Culture Machine because I knew friends in Culture Machine. And I was like, hey, I have this song that it's all about good news. I know it's a little South Indian-ish, but it's something, I relate to. And I believe like there's not enough content for South Indian women. And they're like, oh my God, this is so weird. We were just creating a channel for women. Would you like to be part of it? And I was like, yes, queen. But then I was like, can I have a South Indian perspective to it, even if it is a national channel? Because I feel South India itself was very underrepresented back in the day when it came to content. There was only Put Chutney. Yeah. Later on, all of the Madras Meter and all of the rest came up. But back then, South India itself was underrepresented in the content space, and South Indian women were underrepresented. So I was like, I wrote the deck, and in the deck, like I gave it a lot of names, the channel names and all that. But somewhere in the deck, I think to describe me, I called myself the Sister from the South. My boss read that line and she's like, girl, that's your channel name, Sister from the South. And that's how Sister from the South was born.
Very interesting. So now tell me something more from the industry norms per se. So one, there is a part of a creation, and then there is a part of the performance of the creation. Now, as an agency, we pitch in the artist, and the client often asks us, how many followers does the artist have? Of course, brands look at it with regards to an ROI, and you can achieve those with respect to paid marketing. But what's your take on quality against numbers?
Oh, yes. And I think this is something we all grapple with when we are pitching something to a client. We know there's another artist who's better at this. We know there'll be a better fit for the concept, but we know that we also have to sell the artist with the better numbers and reach. And I think creators themselves have become aware of this now. So what the creators are doing is they have wisened up and they've realized, okay, I've got my content in place, but maybe it's about collaborating with the right content aggregators, the right content incubators, or agencies like you who understand that, who can do the numbers part for them, who can help them with the audience reach, who can tell them, okay, well, here's the YouTube algorithm data for this week. Okay, we have found that based on user data, this is the best time to release your video. Here is the metadata that should be attached to your video. Because if you think about it, numbers can be hacked. And we work in that industry. We understand, okay, it's all an algorithm. It's picking up trending topics and adding that to your video. All of that. There are some creators who are good at both, who can both follow the numbers, take Google Analytics and translate that into creativity. And there are some creators who probably are just really good at content. So it's about collaborating with the right people. I think creators as such, this is my advice to you, do not undervalue the efficacy of numbers, but find someone else to do it for you. Because honestly, if you start worrying about numbers yourself, you will lose what makes you you. Especially if you're starting out. And if you're starting out as a creator, do not look at numbers. Because what will happen then is you will start creating for an audience instead of creating what you want to create. And that is very trend. Like if you're pandering, you will fade away because everyone's pandering.
Right. So a little bit of success and you have clients, and agencies approaching you for work. Of course, your work becomes your own portfolio, but when you're not famous and when you're just starting as a content creator, what should one do to actually pitch in their work to get started with the whole process?
Today, it's really easy to get access to people that you couldn't get access to back in the day. For example, if you want to reach out to an A.R. Rahman, back then you couldn't. But today as a musician, if you want to, it's just about having your content online. So I would say the first thing that any young creator has to do is create. Don't look at numbers, don't look at anything else. Because what is the point of you making one video and then meeting A.R. Rahman versus you making 50 videos, meeting A.R. Rahman next year, but you show him you have 50 videos in your portfolio, versus you just that one video, you met him today, you are half baked and he's like, okay, now what? So I think the first thing is to create. Yes, you all saw us based on that one video that went viral. You saw my Kodaikanal won't that went viral. You are not aware of the 50 videos I've made before that. You are not aware of the 8 to 10 years of work I put in before that, before I went viral. You all see Kanan Gill's pretentious movie reviews. You did not see the 10 years before that where he struggled as a stand-up comic. You see that one video that go viral and you think that's all it takes. One video that could help, but it's the constant creation that some will be a hit, some will be a miss, and something will go viral. And there is one advice though that I will give that is a bit strategic, which is find a niche. For me, my niche was South Indian female. So now to a point in Bombay, the moment anyone in any agency says South Indian female or Tamil female, they think of Sophia Ashraf. And that honestly was a conscious thing I did. I made sure that anything that was Tamil or female related, I put my face out there. And I started kind of consciously branding myself and building towards that. So I feel finding a niche is your best bet. And it can be a super, super esoteric niche. But if you find it, then you will become irreplaceable in that. Because honestly, nobody in an agency has time to go out and do research and find artists.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're in a meeting and the client like, acha, talent batao, and you're like, Sumukhi, Uroj, Sophia. It's the last video you saw on Instagram. It's top of mind. So these are horrible trade secrets I will tell you, but I will do things like if there's a hour-bit interview on Times Now, I'll go and do it. Because it's about top of mind. And you won't believe, I've come on Times Now talking about Tamil Nadu ka electricity issue, but the next day I get a call from a brand because they were watching TV, they saw my face, next day they had a pitch and they remembered my face and they're like, ye ladki hai. So to stay top of mind, yes, find your niche and keep putting your face out there, keep putting your content out there. But when you start off, please don't think about numbers.
I think another thing about starting off is the remuneration part of it. Most artists are undervalued and most of them also don't know how much to charge for a project. how would you simplify this whole remuneration process for budding artists?
For me, initially when I started off, I did not look at remuneration at all. I figured a day job, and I figured one way to pay the bills, which was like advertising. And anything over and above that I did was out of passion. So then anything over and above, because I did it for passion, I did a lot of free work. I collaborated with everyone that I met. I did so much free work that now it's all paying off, because all the people I collaborated with are now the big shot directors, are now the big shot music composers. All the people who we sat together in our house, jamming together, saying, hey, this is a great song, let's put it, spending overnight working on it for nothing just because we loved it. All those friends are now really big in the industry, and we're all like kind of relying on each other because we have worked together and we know our chemistry was great. So in the beginning, I could afford to do things for free because I had a day job. I've met a new kind of, entitled is the wrong word to use, but a new kind of focused or content creator who would say, the only art I create will be art that I want. I will not do boring work.
Okay.
Which for me, maybe I'm a different generation. I'm not Gen Z, I'm not Gen Alpha. For me, you need to find something that pays the salary. And I have done like the most boring work. I have written advertorials. I have written industrial website content. I have I've MC'd. Any way to earn money, I would have done that, even if it's boring. But I see a new breed of content creator who's like, I will not do advertising work because it's sellout-giri, and I will only write content that I enjoy, which is, and I'm not saying it's wrong, no? Which is great because you get to keep your tone of voice, but it's tougher to make money that way. And what will happen then is that you will be so worried about your next paycheck to paycheck that your brain space will not be free to create.
Sure.
Whereas I have dedicated myself, whipped myself, somehow written that boring ass advertorial, somehow done it, but that's made my monthly paycheck, which gives me brain space on a Saturday to write a song versus on a Saturday me going, oh man, rent is due, how do I do this?
Yep.
But my advice is find a boring way to pay your bills so that you have an exciting way to build a personality.
Makes sense. It also keeps you sane at the same time in terms of, especially when you're struggling.
Man. And Bombay, at least, like I've lived in Bombay, Chennai and Hyderabad. Bombay is expensive, and there is that, the moment I step away from Bombay, I realize half the time you're just hustling so that you can make rent. Half the time you're just working so that you can make rent. And in a way, that's good motivation, because you come away from Bombay and you lose that motivation because, hey, you don't have to work that hard to make rent.
Right.
But it's also great because then you have that brain space to think about, hey, what do I want to do next? What is my tone of voice? What is my work saying? So I think that's why I keep doing this. I jump off to Chennai every like 6-7 months, and then I go back to Bombay. I see my creative brain as a vessel. And like the first 21 years of my life, I was just filling that vessel with experiences. And then for the next 10 years, I started emptying that vessel. All those experiences came out in the form of art or music, like the Good News thing. It was an experience of mine, which I put out in the form of a music video. No, I can't talk about that again. So then I realized for 10 years, I put all those 22 years of experience out there. And I'm like, oh shit, I was so busy making content, I didn't have any more new experiences. So now I'm like, okay, I need to date. I need to travel. I need to have friendships. I need to have boredom, You need to be bored if you want to create sometimes. If you're like constantly creating, what do you have to write about?
This is your creator's inspiration, right?
Yeah. So go on a bad date. That's great inspiration, Have bad sex. That's a great punchline.
Great. So just going back to your conversation, where you highlighted that digital as a medium has made it easy, in terms of putting up a song there, which becomes your portfolio eventually. Trying to understand your, preferences in terms of social media and where you feed in your content from, say, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Spotify, TikTok for that fact. What is your preference in terms of going back to creating content in these platforms?
So TikTok is definitely a way to go about it, but the way to do it is, again, not to try and keep up with it, but maybe hire someone who gets it. Hire Gen Z to talk to. I'm constantly calling my cousins, my younger cousins, saying, explain this to me. How did you shoot that? Oh, what is this amazing camera angle? I think it comes from not having a sense of I'm too good for this app or I'm too good for you. It's about being open to learning and not having disdain for anything. And I think all of us have disdain for TikTok. But if we try to learn the kind of camera angles they use,
Absolutely.
we joke about it. But like when I use it in a video, they're like, "Hey, ये TikTok transition hai." Oh, and the app has taught us this, and this is 18-year-olds who have taught me this transition. It's not film school that taught me that transition. So when it comes to apps, I would say be an audience, be a consumer, and choose those apps. But also, I will have to say, this is me as a marketer speaking. As a content creator, I value my mental health a lot. So I don't enjoy social media a lot. So I don't build my social media presence. Whenever brands ask me to post something, I say no. It's built into my contract that if I do something, I will not post it on, because I don't want that pressure of my social media becoming a place to sell. I want my social media to be my safe haven where I can talk to people, and also where I can be an audience. If I'm constantly creating on my social media, I stop being an audience. So for me as a content creator, I work with channels. So I'll work with a Blush, I'll work with a Jhatka. I like to work with a bigger channel but have my presence there, which is not a bad thing, man. If you work with a channel, you can tap into the infrastructure they have. For example, if you work with a multi-channel network like a Dice Media or an OML or a Culture Machine, what you will have is you will tap into their data and analytics tools. All of these companies have great technology. So I feel when you work for a bigger channel, it helps because you have access to a lot more infrastructure than you as a person would have access to.
Great. Just banking on the conversation of the infrastructure, regardless of the fact that you work for a channel or for yourself. So, for three most important things one must have when they're remotely working.
Oh, nice. So I have been directing videos from home. I've just put out a series called Behansplaining, which is something I did as part. I work for this agency called The Rabbit Hole, where we create like promotional content for Netflix on YouTube and social media. So Behansplaining is a show that I've been directing from home, and couple of things that I realized. First thing you need is good internet. Second thing, multi-device is necessary. Have at least two devices, namely a phone and a laptop. I use a phone and a laptop and an iPad because it helps to shoot on one, direct on one. Multi-devices make a difference, and compatibility between those devices. Find a way to get your iPad connected to your laptop so that you're able to work on one and then transfer data to the other. The third and most important, cloud compatibility. Figure out your cloud storage. I work with Google Drive, and the way I do it is me, my editor, my writers, my graders, my music composers all have access to one singular Google Drive, and we use Google Backup and Sync, which means any change that I do to a folder that is physically on my desktop gets updated on Google Drive and gets updated physically on someone else's desktop. Currently, especially in the country with WeTransfer being blocked, I've experimented with Dropbox. Amazon Web Services offers some really good cloud storage, but I found Google Drive to be the most compatible.
Friend us on your socials and let's connect.
Well, that's informative. Now, moving on to the last part of this podcast, where we normally take a question from the internet universe. There's a question which is mentioned about Kodaikanal One, and I'm going to read out to you. I'm very interested to know what your response is. And there's also a very fascinating response to it by another user, but just want to know your thoughts on the same. So the guy says, nothing is catchy, nothing is special in it. Even the sense of lyrics is not at all reflecting in the music, voice, and the video of the song. Tell me one reason to promote this song.
Yeah, this is something I joke about all the time. When people come up to me and they're like, wow, you're doing so much for the environment. I'm like, guys, I rhymed down with now. What the hell? I said, Kodaikanal won't step down until you make amends now. I don't even know if that rhymes. So like, it's just like, I don't think I'm a harbinger of change. I completely get what that guy said by saying it doesn't even rhyme. I cringe at that video, but I think what was beautiful about that video was the fact that the internet was so used to rap videos being about big bootylicious girls,
Right.
and here is someone who was flatter than an LCD screen, who had zero dress sense, and rhymed down with now, who got on stage and got on camera and rapped. But I think everyone shared it because it was the message that mattered and not my fashion sense or my rhyming sense or the music sense. I think what people related to was that, hey, there's a message here and this is something that needs to be spoken about. And it was the millennial and it was the Gen Z and the Gen Alpha that came and said, you know what, we need to speak about this. And that kind of was great for us in the rap industry, because up until then we were like, we want to rap about social causes. Like even a Honey Singh used to write songs about Bhagat Singh and all that. But then everyone's like, nahi, ye sab nahi bikega, this won't sell. Write about high heels and blue eyes and that only sells. So he went with what sold. But then here was Kodaikanal Road, which did well, and then suddenly they were like, hey, this sells too. So that was kind of a cool moment for all of us, that even if it didn't rhyme and it didn't sound good and it was a cover song of all the things, it wasn't an original music.
Wow. So, even the response to this, there's a guy who's actually responded to it saying the reason for the song is not to entertain, but there is a cause behind it, and there are multiple reasons why you should promote it. But I think this reason is more than enough to promote it.
Wow, that's so beautiful, yeah.
Fantastic stuff, Sophia. Now, this has been a great conversation with you. And I had a great time conversing with the Rebel Heart girl. And learning
tattooed on my forehead.
And this has been a great learning process for me as well, and hope our listeners too learn something. And the information that you have shared is very valuable for budding artists and upcoming content creators. Thank you so much, and more power and more success to you. Thank you so much for being a part of this episode.
Thanks, Dakshin. This was great fun.
And that's a wrap. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you have any feedback, please mail it to deliberatetalks@gmail.com. Also, don't forget to follow the Deliberate Talks and Pixelated Egg Digital Ventures on the social media platforms. Join in for a new episode next week. Till then, inspire and be inspired.